A single text message can shatter a life. For Jessica Miller, it wasn't a message of betrayal but one of pity. It read, "Hope you're doing okay." It came from her former mother-in-law, a woman who hadn't spoken to her in a year, and it arrived just minutes before Jessica watched her ex-husband, the man she'd put through business school, step onto the most prestigious charity gala stage in San Francisco. He wasn't alone. On his arm was a younger, brighter version of herself, wearing a diamond that cost more than her entire life savings. In that moment, she was just a ghost in a borrowed dress, a cautionary tale whispered about over champagne. But what they didn't know, what no one could have possibly imagined, was that in less than 24 hours the name being whispered in those same circles wouldn't be his. It would be hers. And it would be associated not with pity, but with a fortune so vast it could buy and sell his entire world 10 times over. The crystal chandeliers of the Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom dripped light onto the city's elite. It was the annual Children's Literacy Foundation Gala, an event Jessica Miller used to help organize. Tonight she was merely a guest, a +1 for her boss at the City Archives, a quiet act of charity on his part. She clutched a small beaded clutch, her knuckles white. Every smile felt like a judgment, every laugh a thinly veiled jab at her expense. It had been exactly 1 year, 3 months, and 12 days since Benjamin Ben Carter had left her. He'd packed his custom-made suits and his Peloton, leaving behind a single sterile note on the kitchen island of their once-shared condo. The note said he needed a partner, not a project manager, a cruel twisting of the years she had spent managing their finances, proofreading his presentations, and sacrificing her own academic ambitions in history so he could climb the corporate ladder at his flashy tech startup, Innovatech. And climb he did. Straight into the arms of Olivia Davenport, the daughter of a real estate mogul whose face was now plastered across every society blog in the Bay Area. Jessica tried to make herself small near a towering floral arrangement, sipping her club soda. She'd hoped to remain invisible, a ghost in a navy blue dress that was elegant but forgettable. But invisibility was not on the evening's agenda. Well, well. Jessica, I almost didn't recognize you out of your natural habitat. Ben's voice, smooth and confident, cut through the din. He stood before her, immaculate in a Tom Ford tuxedo, and beside him, clinging to his arm, was Olivia. She was breathtaking, draped in a glittering gold gown, a supernova next to Jessica's quiet night sky. The diamond on her finger, the one from the blogs, caught the light and fractured it into 100 tiny, painful daggers. "Ben," Jessica said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Olivia, congratulations on the engagement." "I've read all about it." "Oh, thank you." Olivia beamed, her smile wide and seemingly genuine. She was too young to have mastered the art of polite cruelty. "Ben has told me so much about you. You were an absolute saint, apparently, holding down the fort while he was building the empire." It was a line fed to her Jessica knew, a sanitized version of the truth. Ben smirked, a self-satisfied expression that made Jessica's stomach churn. Jess was always practical, Ben said, his tone dripping with condescension. He looked Jessica up and down, a flicker of something pity, disdain in his eyes. Budgets, schedules, research papers. I needed someone who could see the bigger picture, someone with ambition. He squeezed Olivia's hand. Olivia understands that. Her father didn't build Davenport Realty by thinking small. The insult landed exactly as intended. Jessica's ambition was the very thing she had shelved for him. Her dream of getting a PhD in historical preservation, of curating museum exhibits, had been deemed a hobby, while his get-rich-quick tech venture was treated as gospel. A local photographer smelling drama drifted closer. Ben, ever the performer, noticed immediately. He pulled Jessica in slightly, a grotesque pantomime of old friends catching up. "You should have seen the Innovatech quarterly report, Jess," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "We've secured another round of funding. We're going to disrupt the entire logistics industry." He then turned to Olivia. "My brilliant fiancé even introduced me to some key investors from her father's circle." He was parading his success using Olivia as the ultimate trophy, and Jessica as the discarded cautionary past. He was not just showing her what she had lost. He was telling the world why she deserved to lose it. Every word was a public declaration of her inadequacy. Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. She saw the looks from the people around them, the pitying glances from old acquaintances, the smug satisfaction from Ben's new friends. She was a relic, a black and white photo in his new life of dazzling color. "That's wonderful for you, Ben," she managed her throat tight. "I have to go. My boss is waiting." She turned to leave, but Ben's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. It wasn't a harsh grip, but it was possessive, a final assertion of power. "Hey, no hard feelings, right?" he said, his voice a low murmur just for her. "I just want you to be happy. Find a nice, quiet life. It's what you're good at." He released her. As Jessica walked away, her heart hammering against her ribs, she could hear Olivia's light tinkling laugh behind her. She didn't look back. She walked straight past her boss through the grand lobby and out into the cold, foggy San Francisco night. The weight of her failure so publicly displayed felt like a physical shroud. She had given him the best years of her life, and he had thanked her by turning her into a punchline at a party. Little did she know this public crucifixion was the prologue to a story so unbelievable it would soon make Ben Carter and his entire world feel very, very small. The day after the gala was a study in gray. A thick, persistent fog smothered the city, mirroring the suffocating gloom in Jessica's small apartment in the inner Richmond. The navy blue dress lay crumpled on a chair, a sad reminder of the previous night's humiliation. She spent the morning in a haze of stale coffee and self-recrimination, scrolling through the very society blogs that had once been a source of morbid curiosity and were now a testament to her public shaming. There it was, a photo of Ben, Olivia, and her. Ben was grinning. Olivia was radiant, and Jessica was a deer in the headlights, her face pale and her eyes wide with a pain the camera had captured with cruel precision. The caption read, "Innovatech CEO Ben Carter and fiancée Olivia Davenport share a friendly moment with Carter's ex-wife Jessica Miller." A friendly moment. It was a lie so blatant it was almost funny. She was cataloging a collection of 19th century city planning documents at the archives, the scent of old paper and leather, a familiar comfort when her phone buzzed. It was a text from her best friend Chloe, a fiercely loyal art gallery owner. Chloe just saw the pics. "That man is a walking, talking personification of a small man complex. Want me to come over tonight with wine and a voodoo doll?" Jessica managed a weak smile. Jessica wine. Yes, voodoo doll maybe. It was worse than it looked. Chloe. It looked atrocious. "Call me later. Don't let him live in your head rent-free." But he did. His parting words, "Find a nice, quiet life. It's what you're good at," echoed in her mind. He had defined her, packaged her up, and put her on a shelf. The worst part was she was starting to believe him. Maybe this was all she was destined for, a quiet life surrounded by the ghosts of other people's histories. When she returned home that evening, a thick, cream-colored envelope was sticking out of her mailbox. It stood in stark contrast to the usual junk mail and bills. It was heavy, made of expensive cardstock. The return address was for a law firm in the heart of the financial district, Thompson, Crestwood, and Finch. The name sounded old, powerful, and utterly unfamiliar. Her brow furrowed. Was she being sued? Had she witnessed an accident she'd forgotten about? A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. The letter inside was brief and formal. "Dear Ms. Jessica Miller, this letter serves as a formal request for your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience. We are handling a matter of significant personal importance pertaining to the estate of our late client, Mr. Jonathan Beaumont. It is imperative that you attend this meeting in person and that you speak to no one about this correspondence. Please contact my assistant, Ms. Albright, at the number below to schedule an appointment. Sincerely, Arthur Finch, Senior Partner, Thompson, Crestwood and Finch, Jonathan Beaumont." The name meant nothing to her. She searched her memory, the archives of her own life for any connection. Beaumont. Nothing. Her parents were both gone, and she had no other known relatives. Her father had been a firefighter, her mother a nurse. They were good, simple people who had loved her fiercely, but had left behind little more than a mortgaged house and a box of photographs. A scam, she thought. It had to be some elaborate high-end phishing scam. But why her? And a firm like that wouldn't need to scam people. She Googled them. Thompson, Crestwood & Finch was one of the oldest and most respected estate law firms in California, specializing in old money, the kind of wealth that was measured in generations, not funding rounds. Her curiosity warred with her exhaustion. The thought of navigating another high-stakes, intimidating situation so soon after the gala was draining. But the letter's commanding tone, the sheer mystery of it, was a strange, sharp hook in the dull fog of her depression. A matter of significant personal importance. What could that possibly mean? She reread the name. Jonathan Beaumont. It felt like a name from one of the historical documents she worked with every day. A railroad baron, a shipping magnate, a name etched onto the cornerstone of a forgotten building. That night she couldn't sleep. The humiliation of the gala faded, replaced by a restless, nervous energy. Who was this man? And what could he possibly have to do with her? It was a puzzle, and her archivist's mind, trained to find connections and uncover hidden narratives, couldn't let it go. The next morning, driven by a force she didn't quite understand, perhaps it was just the need for something to happen, something to break the bleak inertia of her life, she picked up the phone. "Ms. Albright, please. This is Jessica Miller. I'm calling in reference to a letter from Mr. Finch." A crisp professional voice on the other end responded. "Of course, Ms. Miller. Mr. Finch has been expecting your call. He can see you this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Will that be suitable?" "Yes," Jessica heard herself say, her voice betraying a hint of the tremor she felt inside. 3 o'clock will be fine." As she hung up, she looked around her small, quiet apartment. It was her sanctuary, but it was also her cage. Ben was right. Her life was small. But as she prepared to walk into the lion's den of the financial district to meet a man she'd never heard of about a dead man she didn't know, a tiny, unfamiliar spark flickered within her. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just the thrilling, terrifying possibility of the unknown. The offices of Thompson, Crestwood & Finch were on the 50th floor of the Transamerica Pyramid, a location that was itself a statement of enduring power. The reception area was a cathedral of quiet wealth. Dark mahogany walls were adorned with oil paintings of severe-looking men. The air smelled of old leather and floor polish, and the only sound was the hushed ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was a world away from the frantic, open-plan chaos of Ben's startup. This was money that didn't need to scream. Jessica gave her name to the receptionist, who regarded her with a polite but thorough appraisal. Jessica had worn her best blazer, a simple but well-cut piece she'd bought for her M.A. thesis defense years ago. Still, she felt like an imposter. A moment later, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and a perfectly tailored gray suit emerged from a set of double doors. "Ms. Miller, I am Arthur Finch. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please follow me." His voice was exactly as she'd imagined, deep, resonant, and devoid of unnecessary emotion. He led her down a long, carpeted hallway to a corner office with a breathtaking view of the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in its iconic fog. Books lined every wall, not for decoration, but with the cracked spines and faded gold leaf of constant use. Mr. Finch gestured for her to sit in one of the plush leather armchairs facing his immense oak desk. He sat opposite her, folded his hands, and fixed her with a pair of piercing blue eyes. "Ms. Miller," he began, "I will not waste your time with pleasantries. I was the personal attorney confidant, and I suppose the only friend of Jonathan Beaumont for over 40 years. He passed away last week at the age of 92. Jessica nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry for your loss. But, Mr. Finch, I have to be honest. I have no idea who Mr. Beaumont was. I believe there must be a mistake." Mr. Finch offered a thin, sad smile. "There is no mistake. Jonathan was a man who valued his privacy above all else. He cultivated anonymity as other men cultivate gardens. But he knew exactly who you were. He followed your life from a distance. He has photos of your high school graduation, your wedding, even a newspaper clipping about your work at the city archives." A cold unease crept up Jessica's spine. "He stalked me." "No," Mr. Finch said gently. "He watched over you. You see, Jonathan Beaumont was your maternal grandfather." The statement hung in the air, so dense and heavy it seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Jessica stared at him, her mind racing, trying to connect impossible dots. "That's not possible," she whispered. "My mother's parents died in a car crash before I was born. That's what she told me. That's what my father always said." "What your mother told you was a story," Mr. Finch explained, his voice softening with something akin to pity. "A story born of pain and pride. Your grandmother Genevieve Beaumont did pass away when your mother was young, but Jonathan was very much alive. Your mother Catherine was his only child, his entire world. But she fell in love with a man he didn't approve of, your father, a firefighter. A good, honorable man by all accounts, but not from the world Jonathan had envisioned for his daughter. They argued. Terrible things were said. She chose to leave to be disowned rather than give up the man she loved. She cut him out of her life completely, and in turn cut you off from him." Jessica felt dizzy. Her entire maternal history, a simple tragic story she had accepted without question, was a lie. A lie constructed to protect her, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. "He never tried to contact her, to contact me. After your mother passed away, he reached out to your father once," Mr. Finch said. "But your father, loyal to your mother's memory and her wishes, respectfully declined any contact. So Jonathan respected that. He kept his distance. But he never stopped watching. He never stopped caring. It was his greatest regret, he told me, that he let his pride cost him his daughter and his only grandchild." Jessica was speechless, trying to process the ghost of a family she never knew she had. A grandfather, a powerful, reclusive man who had watched her life from the shadows. Mr. Finch slid a thick, leather-bound document across the desk. "Which brings us to why you are here. This is his last will and testament. Jonathan was a man of considerable means. He was the sole owner of Beaumont Holdings." The name was vaguely familiar. Jessica had seen it on the side of shipping containers and on commercial real estate signs in the financial district. "I thought that was a public company." "He took it private 30 years ago. He hated Wall Street. He preferred to operate without scrutiny." Mr. Finch paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "Beaumont Holdings encompasses a global logistics and shipping network, a commercial real estate portfolio valued in the low 9 figures, a private art collection that would make a museum curator weep, and various other assets. After a few specific bequests to his staff and myself, he has left the entirety of his remaining estate, including a 95% controlling interest in Beaumont Holdings, to you, Jessica." Jessica's brain failed to compute. The words were English, but they didn't make sense. It was like reading a fairy tale. Mr. Finch continued. "The liquid assets, properties, and art collection are valued conservatively at around $900 million. The controlling interest in the company, which generates a net profit of over $200 million a year, is valued at several billion more." Jessica's jaw went slack. She couldn't breathe. Billion. The word was absurd. It was a number for news headlines and villains in movies. It was not a number that had anything to do with her, Jessica Miller, who worried about her car insurance payments and bought her coffee with a rewards card. I don't understand," she stammered. "He believed that blood was the only thing that mattered in the end," Mr. Finch said. "And you are his only blood." He then cleared his throat. "However, there is one significant condition. A stipulation." Of course there was. It couldn't be that simple. Jonathan did not believe in idle wealth. He despised the trust fund children of his peers. He believed that to be worthy of the empire he built, one must understand it, lead it. The will stipulates that for you to inherit, you must assume his position as chairperson of the board of Beaumont Holdings. You must actively serve in that role for a minimum of 1 calendar year. You cannot simply liquidate the assets or hand over control. You must run it. If at the end of that year you wish to step down, you may, but you must first walk in his shoes. Chairperson of the board. The title was so alien it might as well have been in another language. She was an archivist. She managed dusty papers, not global corporations. It was a test, a posthumous test from a grandfather she'd never met. Mr. Finch slid a pen and a single sheet of paper towards her. It was a preliminary acceptance of the terms, a document stating she understood the conditions and wished to proceed. "You don't have to decide today," he said kindly. "Take the will. Read it. Take a week. But know this, Jessica. This isn't just about money. This was his way of giving you the life he felt he cheated your mother out of. A life of power, of influence, of not having to be small or quiet for anyone." The last word struck her like a bolt of lightning. A life of not having to be small or quiet for anyone. Ben's parting shot from the gala echoed in her ears. Find a nice, quiet life. It's what you're good at. Suddenly the fear and confusion were pierced by a new, unfamiliar feeling. A cold, hard spike of anger. For her entire adult life, she had made herself smaller to accommodate a man's ego. She had quieted her own dreams, and her reward had been public humiliation. Now a ghost from the past was offering her a kingdom, not just a kingdom of wealth, but a kingdom of power, a chance to be anything but small and quiet. Her hand, which had been trembling, was suddenly steady. She looked Mr. Finch directly in the eye, the view of the city and its infinite possibilities stretching out behind him. She picked up the pen. "I don't need a week," she said, her voice clear and firm. And she signed her name. Leaving the Transamerica Pyramid felt like stepping onto a different planet. The city streets were the same. The cable cars still rattled, but Jessica's perception of it all had been fundamentally altered. An hour ago, she was a woman struggling to pay her rent. Now the buildings she walked past were just assets numbers on a balance sheet she technically owned. The world had tilted on its axis, and she was struggling to find her footing. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, the heavy, leather-bound copy of the will on the passenger seat like a sacred, terrifying text. Billion. The word still felt unreal, a typo in the story of her life. She drove home in a daze, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts about her mother, a grandfather she'd never known, and the impossible, crushing weight of his legacy. The first person she called was Chloe. "You're not going to believe this," Jessica started, and for the next 20 minutes she recounted the meeting with Mr. Finch. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jess?" Chloe finally said, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "So, let me get this straight. The man who basically called you a boring nobody less than 48 hours ago is now, for all intents and purposes, poorer than your freaking gardener will be." Hearing it put so bluntly sent a hysterical giggle bubbling up in Jessica's chest. "I don't have a gardener." "You will. You'll have a gardener and a chef and someone to professionally hate-watch your ex-husband's life for you." "Oh my God, Jess. This is poetic justice on a level I didn't know existed." The conversation with Chloe grounded her. It made the absurd situation feel a tiny bit more real. But the true aftershock of the day's earthquake was yet to come. News of this magnitude does not stay secret for long in a city built on information and gossip. The transfer of a controlling interest in a behemoth like Beaumont Holdings, even a private one, triggers legal and financial filings. While Mr. Finch had kept it as quiet as possible, a tremor was moving through the city's financial circles. By the next morning, the Wall Street Journal had a short but explosive story on its website. Reclusive billionaire Jonathan Beaumont dead at 92. Granddaughter Jessica Miller named sole heir and new chair. Jessica saw it when she woke up. Her phone, which usually had a few notifications, had dozens. Texts from people she hadn't heard from in years. Missed calls from unknown numbers. It was terrifying. She turned it on silent. Meanwhile, across town in the glass and steel offices of Innovatech, Ben Carter was in the middle of a tense meeting with his investors. Their second round funding was contingent on landing a major logistics partner. They were struggling. The big players were wary of his unproven technology. He was projecting confidence, waving his hands and throwing out buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift when his phone buzzed insistently on the table. It was his CFO. He ignored it. A minute later it buzzed again, and again. Annoyed, he finally glanced at the screen. There was a text message with a link to the Wall Street Journal article. He clicked it, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion as he read the headline. Jessica Miller. It had to be a different Jessica Miller. His Jessica Miller cataloged old maps. His Jessica Miller's idea of a big investment was buying organic kale. He read the article. Then he read it again. The details were sparse but clear. Unknown granddaughter, sole heir, chairperson of Beaumont Holdings. He knew that name. Beaumont Holdings was one of the Leviathans, the very kind of company he was desperately trying to partner with. The blood drained from his face. The conference room, the investors, the whiteboard covered in his frantic scribbles, it all faded into a dull roar. His mind replayed the scene at the gala. His smug pronouncements. His condescending pity. Find a nice quiet life. It's what you're good at. He had publicly shamed a woman who could now buy his entire company with the money she probably found in her new couch cushions. The humiliation he felt was 1,000 times more potent than what he had inflicted on her. It wasn't just that she was rich. It was that she was powerful. She was now the chairperson of a major corporation, while he was still essentially a glorified beggar with a PowerPoint presentation. He abruptly ended the meeting, mumbling something about a family emergency. He locked himself in his office, his hands shaking. His first instinct was disbelief. This was a cosmic joke. His second was rage. How dare she? How dare this happen to her? It was unearned. It was a lottery ticket. He had worked for his success. He had built his company from the ground up with her unpaid labor as the foundation, a fact he conveniently ignored. His third and most potent instinct was calculation. He scrolled through his phone and found her number. He hesitated. What could he even say? Then desperation took over. He typed out a text. Ben, Jess. I just saw the news. Is this real? He waited. 5 minutes passed. No reply. He sent another. Ben. This is insane. In a good way, I'm so happy for you. We need to talk. Still nothing. The silence from her was a wall he couldn't penetrate. He tried calling. It went straight to voicemail. She had blocked him. The reality hit him. She had cut him off. The quiet, accommodating Jessica he knew was gone, replaced by a silent, inaccessible fortress of wealth. He began to pace his office like a caged animal. His mind, always scheming, began to churn. She couldn't do this. He was part of her story. He had shaped her for better or worse. Her past was entwined with his. In his deeply narcissistic worldview, her success was in some twisted way connected to him. It was a resource, and he needed resources. He thought back on their marriage, their shared accounts, their joint tax returns, the business plans they had idly discussed over dinner. There had to be something, an angle, a loose thread he could pull on. At the same time, Olivia Davenport was having brunch with her friends. Her phone lit up with the same news alerts. She read the article, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rising in astonishment. She remembered the pale, sad woman from the gala. She had felt a pang of pity for her then. Now that pity was curdling into something else, a strange mix of intimidation and dawning suspicion. She looked at the diamond on her own finger, a jewel that had seemed so magnificent 2 days ago. It suddenly felt a little smaller, a little less bright. She remembered the venom in Ben's voice when he'd spoken to Jessica, the absolute certainty with which he had dismissed her. Had he really not known, or was his judgment, the very thing she found so attractive, fundamentally flawed? The aftershock had hit. Ben Carter had built his life on the idea that he was the smartest man in any room, but in the space of a single news cycle he had been made to look like a fool. And a fool with a wounded ego is a very dangerous man indeed. Jessica's first day as chairperson of Beaumont Holdings was less a coronation and more a trial by fire. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit chosen by a personal shopper Mr. Finch had insisted on, she felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The suit was armor, but beneath it her heart hammered a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The Beaumont Holdings headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of its own skyscraper, a sleek, imposing tower of black glass and steel that loomed over the Embarcadero. As she stepped out of the private elevator into the executive suite, she was met by a phalanx of stone-faced individuals. This was the board. Mr. Finch was by her side, a steady, calming presence. He made the introductions. There was Philip Grant, the CEO, a man with a ruthlessly lean build and the predatory stillness of a hawk. He had been with the company for 30 years, working his way up from the loading docks, and it was an open secret that he had expected to be given control upon Jonathan Beaumont's death. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were cold chips of ice. He saw her not as a leader, but as an obstacle. There was Beatrice Shaw, the CFO, a woman who seemed to calculate the worth of everything she looked at, including Jessica. The others were a blur of expensive suits and wary expressions, heads of legal operations and global strategy. They were all Jonathan Beaumont's people, fiercely loyal to his memory and deeply skeptical of the archivist who had appeared out of nowhere to take his throne. The boardroom was an intimidating space. A single massive slab of polished granite served as the table, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay, a view of the ships and ports that formed the bedrock of the Beaumont Empire. At the head of the table was a larger, more ornate chair. Her chair. Taking her seat felt like a monumental act. She could feel their collective gaze on her, dissecting her, waiting for her to fail. Philip Grant kicked off the meeting. Ms. Miller. He began, his voice smooth but edged with steel. While we welcome you to the company, we are in the middle of several time-sensitive and highly complex negotiations. Perhaps it would be most efficient if Mr. Finch were to walk you through the basics of our operations privately, while the existing executive team continues to manage the day-to-day. It was a clear power play. He was attempting to sideline her from the very start, to relegate her to a ceremonial role while he ran the show. The old Jessica would have acquiesced. She would have apologized for being in the way and agreed that it was the most sensible option. But the memory of Ben's smirk and the weight of her grandfather's legacy fueled a new steely resolve. Thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Grant, she said, her voice even and clear, surprising even herself. However, my grandfather's will was explicit. I am to actively serve as chair. That means I need to understand every facet of this business, starting with these time-sensitive negotiations. Please bring me up to speed. A flicker of surprise and then annoyance crossed Philip's face. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. Beatrice Shaw, the CFO, pushed a thick binder across the table towards her. This is the briefing on the proposed acquisition of the Port of Oakland's primary logistics partner, a deal worth $200 million. She said, her tone implying that Jessica wouldn't understand a single page. For the next 2 hours, Jessica was inundated with a flood of information, a tsunami of acronyms, financial projections, and corporate jargon. EBITDA synergy, CapEx leveraging assets. It was a foreign language. She listened intently, taking notes, asking simple, clarifying questions that she could tell they found rudimentary. She felt their impatience, their barely concealed contempt. She was drowning, and they were watching. She left the meeting feeling utterly defeated. The confidence she had scraped together that morning had evaporated. They were right. She was an imposter, a librarian in a Shark Tank. That evening she met Mr. Finch in her grandfather's old office, a magnificent space she had yet to occupy. It was preserved exactly as he had left it, filled with antique maps, maritime artifacts, and the faint scent of cigar smoke and old books. It was a disaster, she confessed, sinking into a leather armchair. They see me as a joke. Mr. Finch regarded her thoughtfully. They see a stranger. Jonathan was a formidable man. His approval was hard-won. You must earn theirs, but do not try to be him. You cannot win on their field using their weapons. You must find your own. His words stuck with her. Find your own weapons. What were her weapons? She wasn't a ruthless CEO or a financial wizard. She was a historian, an archivist. Her skills were in research and finding patterns in the past and seeing the narrative hidden beneath the surface of things. For the next few days, she didn't go back to the boardroom. Instead, she asked for the key to her grandfather's private archives, a climate-controlled room adjacent to his office that no one had entered since his death. The board saw it as an abdication proof that she was retreating to what was comfortable. Let them, she thought. The room was a treasure trove. It was filled not with corporate reports but with Jonathan Beaumont's personal history, decades of handwritten journals, boxes of correspondence, blueprints for early projects, and annotated maps. It was a mess, but it was a language she understood. She spent days poring over the documents, cross-referencing his journals with old company financials. She wasn't just reading about a billionaire, she was getting to know her grandfather. She read about his grief over his daughter, his frustration, his pride in the empire he had built from a single fishing boat. And then she found it. It was a notation in a journal from 1985 next to a passage about a disagreement with the Port of Oakland. They are short-sighted, he had written. The future is not in the Deepwater Channel, but in the fallow land to the east. The old railway spurs. Acquire it quietly. A patient man's game. She cross-referenced the note with old property ledgers. Sure enough, over a period of 5 years in the late 80s, Beaumont Holdings had acquired several seemingly useless parcels of land adjacent to the port, purchased through shell corporations for pennies on the dollar. The properties had been sitting on the books, their value barely registering against the company's massive assets. No one, not even Philip Grant, seemed to know they were part of a long-forgotten strategy. She then pulled up a modern satellite map and overlaid it with city infrastructure plans. A new highway interchange and a proposed high-speed rail line were slated to run directly through that fallow land. Owning that land didn't just give them leverage in the port negotiations, it gave them a stranglehold. They didn't need to acquire the port's partner. They could build their own superior facility on land they already owned, effectively making the company they were planning to buy obsolete. The $200 million acquisition wasn't just a deal, it was a mistake, a massive overpayment based on incomplete information. Armed with this knowledge, she called an emergency board meeting. She walked in not with fear, but with purpose. She stood at the head of the table, and on the large screen behind her, she projected the old maps, the journal entries, the property ledgers, and the modern infrastructure plans. She laid it all out calmly and methodically. We are about to spend $200 million to acquire a company whose primary asset is access to the port, she concluded. But my grandfather's notes show that we already own the key to the port's future. We don't need to buy our way in. We can build our own gate. The room was silent. Philip Grant stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief. Beatrice Shaw was furiously typing on her tablet, verifying the property records. The other board members were looking at Jessica with a new, startling expression: respect. She hadn't used their language of finance and aggression. She had used her own. She had used history. She had listened to the ghost in the archives. For the first time since she'd signed those papers, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt like Jonathan Beaumont's granddaughter. While Jessica was finding her footing in the world of corporate titans, Ben Carter was sinking. The news of Jessica's inheritance had sent a shockwave through his professional life. Investors who had once been impressed by his bravado were now looking at him with a critical eye. If his judgment about his own wife was so spectacularly wrong, what else was he wrong about? The promised partnership with a major logistics firm failed to materialize, and his second round of funding was suddenly in jeopardy. He was running out of money and time. His days were consumed by a festering obsession with Jessica's fortune. It was a monumental injustice, a cosmic error he felt entitled to correct. He had tried everything. He'd left pleading voicemails. He'd sent long rambling emails alternating between apologies for his behavior and reminders of their shared journey. He'd even sent flowers to the Beaumont Holdings building, a pathetic gesture that was likely discarded by a security guard. All of it was met with a wall of impenetrable silence. His desperation curdled into a dark, spiteful resolve. If she wouldn't give him a piece of her fortune, he would take it. He spent his nights digging through old boxes he'd taken from their marriage, searching for a weapon. He sifted through old photos, bank statements, and tax returns. And then, in a dusty folder at the bottom of a banker's box, he found it. It was a slim business plan from early in their marriage for a venture they had nicknamed Package Perfect. It was Jessica's idea, born from her frustration with the inefficiency of museum artifact shipping. It was a concept for a software platform that would use historical shipping data and predictive analytics to optimize routes for fragile, high-value goods. She had done the research, written the proposal. He had contributed the buzzwords and designed a logo. They had co-signed the initial exploratory LLC, filing a document that cost them $150, and which they had abandoned a few months later when he decided to pursue the bigger idea that became Innovatech. Innovatech was at its core a scaled-up, commercialized version of Jessica's original concept. He had stolen her idea, repackaged it, and sold it as his own genius. At the time, she had been his supportive wife, and it felt like a shared asset. Now it was his Achilles' heel, and he thought his golden ticket. He contacted a notoriously aggressive lawyer, a man named Nick Valenti, who specialized in messy, high-profile divorces and corporate litigation. Valenti's eyes lit up when Ben laid out his story. The gambit was audacious and built on a foundation of lies. They would file a lawsuit against Jessica Miller. The claim that Innovatech was a joint marital enterprise, an evolution of the Package Perfect concept they had developed together. They would argue that her sudden massive inheritance constituted a change in material circumstances. During their marriage, they lacked the capital to pursue the venture to its full potential. Now she possessed that capital. Therefore, Ben was entitled to a significant portion of her inheritance as retroactive investment capital for the company they had built together. He wasn't just asking for a slice of her money, he was demanding half of her company. Beaumont Holdings arguing that its logistics empire was the perfect vehicle to finally realize their shared dream. It was a legal Hail Mary, flimsy and outrageous. But its purpose wasn't necessarily to win in court. Its purpose was to create chaos. It was a nuisance suit designed to drag Jessica's name through the mud, to paint her as a greedy ex-wife who had abandoned her partner the moment she struck gold. It was designed to entangle her in a messy public battle that would distract her, undermine her authority at Beaumont, and force her to the negotiating table just to make it go away. The day the lawsuit was filed, the media erupted. Valenti, a master of public relations, leaked the story to a prominent gossip site, which ran it with a sensational headline, "Tech CEO sues billionaire ex-wife. She stole my dream, and now she's stealing my future." The story was accompanied by carefully selected photos, Ben looking stressed and determined in his office. A smiling photo of him and Jessica from happier times. A copy of the co-signed Package Perfect LLC filing. Ben gave a gut-wrenching and completely fabricated interview, painting himself as the heartbroken visionary betrayed by the woman he had loved and supported. "I worked 100-hour weeks to build our dream," he claimed, his voice thick with false emotion. "Jessica was my partner in everything. All I'm asking for is what's fair. She has the resources now to make our original vision a reality, but she wants to cut me out to pretend I never existed. It's not just about the money. It's about the principle." The public narrative was set. To a world that didn't know the truth, it was a compelling story. A struggling entrepreneur versus a cold new money heiress. The comment sections online were a cesspool of misogyny and vitriol directed at Jessica. The news hit the boardroom at Beaumont Holdings like a grenade. Philip Grant convened an emergency meeting, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. "This is a disaster," he announced, throwing a copy of a newspaper with Ben's face on the cover onto the granite table. "Our new chairperson, the face of our company, is embroiled in a scandalous public lawsuit. It makes us look unstable. It calls her character and judgment into question. This is exactly the kind of liability I was worried about." The other board members who had just begun to respect Jessica now looked at her with renewed doubt. The lawsuit, as Ben and Valenti intended, was poisoning the well. It was a direct assault on her newfound authority, an attempt to drag her back down to the place he felt she belonged. Jessica sat at the head of the table, her face pale but her expression resolute. The personal betrayal was a knife in her gut. He hadn't just stolen her idea. He was now trying to steal her future using a twisted version of their past as his weapon. He was trying to do to her what he did best, make her small. She looked at the concerned and skeptical faces around the table. She knew this was another test far more personal and vicious than the last. Ben's desperate scavenger's gambit was not just a lawsuit, it was an act of war. And Jessica knew she had to fight back, not just for the money or the company, but for the truth of her own life. The lawsuit was a war fought on two fronts. Publicly, Ben's fabricated story cast Jessica as a cold-hearted opportunist. Internally, Philip Grant used the scandal as a weapon, circling like a shark smelling blood in the water, convincing board members that the heiress experiment was a liability the company could no longer afford. They had Jessica cornered, believing her to be an amateur caught in a professional's game. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They mistook her quiet nature for weakness, forgetting that an archivist's greatest skill is to find the single, irrefutable truth buried under mountains of falsehoods. While her lawyers managed the public battle, Jessica retreated to her own kind of battlefield, the digital archives of her past. She spent her nights sifting through old hard drives and cloud accounts, not with emotional turmoil but with cold, analytical precision. There she found it. The smoking gun. It was an email chain from years ago. The first email was from her sent to Ben, excitedly outlining the package-perfect concept with detailed notes. The second sent just 2 days later was from Ben to his future Innovatech co-founder Daniel Finch. He had forwarded her entire email, stripped her name from it, and written a single line above, "Check out this great idea I just had." It was an act of plagiarism so blatant, so arrogant, it was breathtaking. But she didn't stop there. Curious about the company's vulnerabilities, she used her newfound access and research skills to launch a quiet audit of the Port of Oakland deal Philip was so eager to push through. What she found was a pattern of corruption-inflated invoices and consulting fees paid to shell companies owned by Philip's relatives. With her evidence secured, she didn't call for a settlement conference. She called an emergency board meeting. Philip Grant began, his tone dripping with false concern. "As you know, the ongoing litigation involving Ms. Miller has become a significant distraction. It is my duty to suggest we consider a change in leadership until these personal matters are resolved." He was calling for her head. The board members shifted, their faces grim. "Thank you, Philip," Jessica said, her voice cutting through the tension as she rose to her feet. "You're right. It's time to resolve all distractions, permanently." She projected the email chain onto the boardroom's main screen. The room fell silent as the story of Ben's theft unfolded in stark black and white. "Mr. Carter's lawsuit is based on a lie," Jessica announced, her voice ringing with authority. "My legal team is filing this evidence in a motion to dismiss, along with a countersuit for fraud and intellectual property theft. That distraction," she said, clicking the screen off, "is now over." Before anyone could react, she pivoted. "And speaking of fraud," she continued, her gaze landing squarely on Philip Grant, This experience has taught me the importance of rooting out any and all vulnerabilities to this company. The next slide showed the results of her audit. Invoices, bank transfers, a web of deceit proving Philip was embezzling millions. You used my legal battle as a smokescreen to rush through a deal that was enriching you personally. You are the liability, Philip. You are the distraction. The boardroom was stunned into silence. Philip's face was a mask of pure shock and fury. In one masterful, brutal stroke, Jessica had defended her name, exposed her ex-husband as a fraud, and unmasked the traitor in their midst. She had not only survived the war on two fronts, she had won it decisively. The board will now vote on the immediate termination of Mr. Grant's employment, she declared. The vote was unanimous. As security escorted a sputtering Philip from the room, the remaining board members looked at Jessica with a newfound profound respect. She was not the lucky inheritor. She was not the scorned ex-wife. She was the chairwoman who had protected their company with a skill and ruthlessness none of them had seen coming. Her reign had truly begun. And so the story of Jessica Miller is not one of luck, but of metamorphosis. It's a story about how the world can try to define you to put you in a box labeled pitiable, quiet, or less than. Jessica was handed a kingdom, but her real victory wasn't in the billions she inherited. It was in the strength she unearthed within herself. She transformed the quiet precision of an archivist into the sharpest weapon in a corporate boardroom. She proved that the greatest power isn't the money you have, but the integrity you refuse to surrender. Her ex-husband tried to write her final chapter as a tragedy, but she took the pen and wrote an epic of her own triumph. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most humiliating endings are just the disguised beginnings of our most extraordinary journeys. If Jessica's story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of unbelievable twists and ultimate vindication. Thank you for listening.